So if you're using R and Amazon Redshift, you know that connecting to your database is pretty much a daily task. But how are you really doing it? Today, we're going to ditch that old, risky habit of sticking credentials right in your code. We're going to explore a much more modern, secure way using AWS IAM roles, and we'll do it all from inside Posit Workbench. Okay, let's be real for a second. Have you ever just copied a database password and pasted it right into your R script? Come on, we've all been tempted. It feels like a quick shortcut, right? But it's basically like leaving your house key under the doormat. It's a huge security risk, especially when that code gets shared or, even worse, checked into GitHub. The good news is, there's a much better way. And this slide really nails the difference. Over on the left, you've got the old way, a password that lives forever, just sitting there, a ticking time bomb, really. But on the right, that's the new way. We get temporary credentials that are short-lived and managed centrally. The big idea here is that we're moving away from a static secret to a dynamic, automated process. So, how do we actually make this happen? Well, the magic behind this whole secure approach is something called AWS Identity and Access Management, or IAM for short. This is the bedrock, the foundation that makes this entire secure workflow possible. You know, at the heart of all this is the IAM role. The best way to think about it is it's not a user, it's more like a hat that your R session can wear. When it puts on this hat, it temporarily gets a very specific set of permissions, like, say, the ability to talk to Redshift, but it never needs a permanent password or access key to do it. I love this analogy, the automated valet key. Here's how it works. Your R session basically walks up and asks for access. AWS IAM, acting like the valet, hands it a special temporary key, a username and password. Now, this key only works for a little while, and it only works for one specific thing, unlocking your Redshift cluster. Then it's useless. Pretty cool, right? All right, before we dive headfirst into the code, let's just do a quick pre-flight check to make sure everything's set up. Trust me, getting this stuff sorted out now can save you a whole lot of headaches later. Okay, so here's what you're going to need. The big one is Posit Workbench with the AWS integration already enabled. If you start a new session and you don't see a dropdown for an AWS role, you'll need to go have a chat with your admin. You'll also need an IAM role that's been configured, IAM off turned on for Redshift, a few R packages like POS and ODBC, and, of course, the details for your cluster. Okay, with all our prerequisites checked off, we're ready for the main event. We're going to break this whole process down into 4 super clear, manageable steps right inside an R script. So here's our game plan. First, we'll assume the role. Then we'll use that role's power to generate some temporary credentials. After that, we'll actually connect to the database. And finally, we'll talk about how to manage that connection so it stays secure. Let's tackle these one by one. Step 1 is actually the easiest part, which is awesome. When you kick off a new session in Posit Workbench, you literally just pick the right IAM role from a drop-down menu. That's it. Workbench takes care of all the complicated stuff behind the scenes, assuming the role and making those AWS credentials available to your R session. But hey, how do we know it actually worked? We can check it. We'll use an R package called POS to ask the AWS Security Token Service, or STS, a very simple question. Who am I right now? The getCallerIdentity function will spit back this long string called an ARN, which is just a unique Amazon name. And that right there is your proof that your R session is wearing the correct IAM role hat. All right, so our R session now has an identity and the right permissions. We're ready for step 2. We're going to use that POS package again, but this time we're going to ask the Redshift service directly for a temporary username and password so we can get into the database. Now, you've got 2 main ways to do this. For most people, most of the time, get cluster credentials with IAM is what you want. It just tells Redshift, hey, create a tent user for me based on my IAM identity. The other one, get cluster credentials, is for more niche cases, like when you need to map your IAM identity to a database user that already exists. And this is probably the most important part of this whole thing. The credentials you get back are not permanent. They have a self-destruct timer built in for a maximum of 1 hour. After that, poof, they stop working. And that is a feature, not a bug. It's the absolute core of our security model. Okay, we've got our temporary username and password, and they're safely stored in some variables. Now we can finally do the thing we came here to do, connect to the database. And you know, the great news is that this part should look really familiar. Whether you like using the ODBC package or RJDBC, You're just going to pass those temporary user and password variables into your normal DB Connect function. We usually recommend ODBC because it plays so nicely with the connections pane right inside Posit Workbench. So, we're connected, but our job as a security-conscious coder isn't quite finished yet. Let's go over a few best practices for keeping this connection going and making sure our whole workflow is as tough and secure as possible. Here's a quick little checklist to keep in your back pocket. First, if you have a script that's going to run for a long time, you need a plan to regenerate the credentials before they expire. Second, and this should be obvious, never ever print or log that temporary password. Also, always make sure your IAM policies grant the absolute minimum permissions needed. And here's a pro tip. If you can't connect, try a quick telnet test. It can tell you if you have a network problem or a code problem. 3,600. That's how many seconds you get. 1 hour. This number, this is what it's all about. By making our credentials expire, we shrink the window of opportunity for anything bad to happen down to almost nothing. A stolen key that only works for an hour is way less scary than one that works forever. So let's zoom out and wrap this all up. Let's focus on the big picture. Why did we just go through all of that? What's the real benefit here? Well, the takeaway is actually really simple, but it's incredibly powerful. You've fundamentally leveled up your security. You've ripped out a fragile, high-risk, manually managed password and replaced it with a dynamic, secure, and automated workflow that uses the best practices of modern cloud security. That is a huge win. And that leaves us with one last really important question to think about. This whole mindset of using temporary role-based access, it doesn't just apply to databases. So now that you've got your database connection locked down, what part of your workflow will you secure next? Thanks for tuning in.